Good morning, my friends. Welcome to Keswick Chapel, the Chew. I'm Pastor Robert. This is day 2 of week 37. This week we're looking at the way of Jesus' hospitality from Luke chapter 10, verses 38 through 42. If you haven't read that passage, I encourage you to do so. Today we're going to focus on what is our history of hospitality in the church. It's actually our history going all the way back to the beginning of the Old Testament. I'm going to share some verses with you from the Old Testament and the New Testament here this morning, here in a moment. I encourage you to grab a pen and paper so you can write them down. In verse 38 of our passage, as Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. She invited him in. Pohl, as we talked about yesterday, said this: hospitality is a way of life fundamental to Christian identity. Christians are those who make room for others. In Genesis chapter 18, verses 2 through 8, we read the story of Abraham, and he looks up one evening and he has strangers standing basically at the gate, if you will. Remember, Abraham lived in a tent, so he really didn't have a gate, but he did have an area immediately around his tents. So he looks up, he sees these strangers, and he hurries over to them, and he says, "Friends, come, let me give you something to drink and something to eat. Rest, the day is almost done." And so they go with him. So he invited them in, and then he shared what he had with them. In Exodus chapter 22, verse 21, we're not to treat foreigners wrongly. We're not to mistreat them. We're not to oppress them. We're supposed to take care of the foreigners. Who's a foreigner? In our society today, a foreigner is someone from another country, and yet that's not necessarily always true. It could be a foreigner from another state, because our states in this country can be very different depending on where you come from. So be kind to foreigners. Don't oppress them. Don't mistreat them. In Leviticus chapter 19, verse 34, talking about strangers, Moses writes, "Treat the stranger that lives among you as family. Love them like family. Take care of them." Job says in Job 31 verse 32 that no stranger had to sleep in the street. His door was always open. He was always ready to welcome those who needed shelter. Then we read Luke 10:38 about Martha. In Acts chapter 2, verses 42 through 47, we read about the first church, and it says that they devoted themselves to the teaching of the apostles and to one another, eating, living together, sharing with one another as they had need, living together, being generous with one another, taking care of one another. In Acts 28, verse 7, Luke talks about Publius invited them into their home. So this is our history as a peculiar people. As Christians, we are a peculiar people, just as the Hebrews were peculiar among all the nations. So our history is one of caring, of generosity, of giving, of inviting in, of loving, of sharing, and welcoming people in. This is our heritage. We need to understand this. You know, when it comes to hospitality, over the centuries, the idea of hospitality has kind of changed from what Jesus meant into entertainment. And in entertaining others, we want to kind of showcase our wealth, if you will, or our status. We want people to see how well we're doing. And that is not the definition of hospitality as Jesus intends it, or as he intended it when he was with his disciples. If we read Luke chapter 14, verses 12 through 14, we read this. Jesus says, "When you give a luncheon or a dinner, do not invite your friends, your brothers or sisters, or your relatives, or your rich neighbor. If you do, they may want to repay you in kind. But when you have a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed. Although they cannot repay you, you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. Very important for us to understand God's idea of hospitality, to understand Jesus' idea of hospitality, to understand our history of being a hospitable people. I asked you a couple of questions yesterday, and I'll ask them again. What are some fears that we have when it comes to welcoming strangers in or in helping strangers? What are acts of welcoming that you and I can engage in today to be open and receptive for others, to make room in our lives for others? What can we do? This is the way of Jesus. As we've talked about this morning, our history is one of hospitality, and it's Jesus' way. So which way are we choosing? Are we choosing the way of Jesus, or are we choosing our own way? I pray as you chew on these things today, my friends, that you'll allow the Holy Spirit to help you to have eyes to see and ears to hear God's truth from His Word. That you'll have a receptive heart and mind to receive these truths, and then that you will take action on what you believe to be true. I pray you'll have a wonderful day, my friends. Go in the peace of God. Blessings to you. Bye for now.